Communications Officer Marcus Vale stared through the viewport of the Starfarer as it settled into orbit around Zilia Prime. The blue-green planet swirled below like a marble of hope and terror, mostly terror at the moment. He adjusted his formal dress uniform for the 13th time in as many minutes and muttered the Zillian greeting phrase under his breath. "Greshka Tavorn," he whispered, practicing the clicking sound at the back of his throat that the language required. "Greshka Tavorn. You're going to wear out those words before the banquet even starts," Lieutenant Arya Kelm said, appearing at his side with a datapad. "And stop fiddling with your collar, sir. You look fine." Mark dropped his hands to his sides immediately. "Is everything prepared? The menu, the seating arrangements, the translator protocols. All finalized and triple-checked." Arya said, her efficiency as refreshing as always. "The Zillian delegation arrives in 1 hour. I've prepped the honor guard and the kitchen staff is putting the finishing touches on the molecular gastronomy spectacle that will hopefully not poison anyone." Mark grimaced. "Your confidence is overwhelming, Lieutenant." "Just being realistic. First contact banquets are notoriously tricky." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Why so nervous? This isn't your first diplomatic rodeo." Mark turned from the viewport to face his executive officer. "You know why." "Ah," Arya said, the corner of her mouth twitching. "The Lucky Vale reputation." The nickname had followed him across 3 star systems. Marcus Vale, the communications officer, who somehow survived impossible situations through sheer dumb luck, but who inevitably stepped in cultural landmines that created those situations in the first place. On Proxima B, he'd accidentally proposed marriage to the Chancellor's son while trying to complement the architecture. On Europa Colony, he'd mistaken a sacred prayer ritual for a dance invitation and nearly sparked a holy war. Yet each time his inexplicable luck had seen him through a fact that made his superiors simultaneously value and fear his presence at sensitive diplomatic functions. "I've studied their customs for weeks," Mark said. "I've memorized their formal address protocols, dietary restrictions, and proxemic comfort zones. I even learned a few idioms." Arya's eyebrows shot up. "Idioms, Mark, that's advanced territory. Even the linguistic AI struggles with Zillian metaphors. I overheard Ambassador Shen using one when he was practicing. It sounded beautiful." Mark smiled, feeling a spark of confidence. "I think it might be a nice touch to show them we respect their culture beyond just the basics." Arya looked unconvinced. "Just stick to the script for tonight, okay? The Zillians are our first solid chance at an alliance against the Dominion. Earth needs this to work." Mark nodded, sobering immediately at the mention of the Dominion. The expansionist empire had been consuming frontier worlds for the past decade, and Earth's colonial holdings were directly in their path. The Zillians, with their advanced propulsion technology, and their allies, the Gronak, with their psychic defense systems, represented humanity's best hope for survival. "I won't let Earth down," Mark said firmly. "Good." Arya handed him the datapad. "Here's the final guest list. The Zillian Ambassador Threes will lead their delegation of 7. Pay special attention to Dr. Naira. She's their cultural attaché and junior diplomatic officer. Word is, she's more open to human customs than the others. She might be our best inroad." Mark scanned the information, pausing on the image of Dr. Naira. Even by Zillian standards, she appeared young, her exoskeletal ridges less pronounced. Her 4 eyes bright with an intelligence that transcended species. Unlike the stiff, formal poses of the other Zillians, she had been captured mid-gesture hands, animated as though explaining something fascinating. "Interesting," he murmured. "Focus, sir," Arya said, reclaiming the datapad. "I need to oversee the final security sweep. The banquet begins at 1900 hours. Please arrive early and sober." "When have I ever been drunk on duty?" Mark protested. "The Centauri Summit," Arya replied without hesitation. "That was medicinal. The pressure change. Save it for someone who wasn't there to carry you back to your quarters." With a crisp nod, she strode away, leaving Mark alone with his reflection in the viewport and his gnawing anxiety. He took a deep breath and returned to practicing the greeting. But his mind kept drifting to the Zillion idiom he'd overheard. Ambassador Shen had mentioned it was a compliment of the highest order, perfect for breaking the ice with the more approachable members of the delegation. "Your mandibles move like moon moths dancing," Mark said softly, trying to capture the lyrical quality of the phrase. It had a poetic beauty to it, and he made a mental note to use it if the opportunity arose, particularly with Dr. Naira. First impressions were everything in diplomacy. With renewed determination, Mark left the viewport and headed to his quarters to prepare. Tonight would go perfectly. It had to. The grand banquet hall of the Starfarer had been transformed. Holographic star maps shimmered across the ceiling, depicting both Earth's and Zillia's home constellations intertwined in a dance of light. The long table gleamed with Earth's finest crystal and silverware, while ceremonial Zillion eating implements, carved from sacred stonewood, had been placed alongside them. Mark stood near the entrance, watching the staff make final adjustments to the elaborate display of Earth and Zillion delicacies. The human chef had spent weeks studying Zillion biochemistry to ensure the alien dishes were both authentic and non-toxic to the human digestive system. The resulting spread was visually stunning colors and textures that challenged human perception alongside more familiar dishes from Earth. "Breathtaking, isn't it?" Captain Helena Chen said, appearing beside Mark. "Hard to believe this is the same hall where the crew plays zero-G handball on recreation days." Mark straightened to attention. "Captain, yes, the transformation is remarkable." "At ease, Officer Vale." Chen's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Save the stiffness for the Zillions. I'm told they appreciate formality." "Yes, ma'am. I've read your background research on their customs. Thorough work." Mark felt a glow of pride. "Thank you, Captain." "Just remember," she said, lowering her voice, "no improvisation tonight. We need this alliance too badly to risk, well, to risk me being me," Mark finished with a rueful smile. Chen had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was going to phrase it more diplomatically." "No need, Captain. I'm well aware of my reputation, but I promise you I've prepared extensively for this engagement." The captain nodded. "Good. The Zillions are arriving as we speak. Ambassador Threes is known for punctuality, bordering on chronological aggression." As if on cue, the ship's AI announced, "Zillion delegation approaching main diplomatic bay." "Places everyone," Chen called out, and the human delegation moved into their receiving formation. Mark took his position near the middle of the line, rehearsing the formal greeting in his head. Minutes later, the doors slid open to reveal the Zillion delegation. They entered in perfect synchronization, 7 tall figures draped in iridescent ceremonial vestments that shifted color with each movement. At their head walked Ambassador Threes, nearly 7 feet tall, with an exoskeletal ridge that added another 6 inches to his imposing height. His 4 eyes, 2 large primary ones and 2 smaller secondary ones positioned above, scanned the room with unnerving precision. "Captain Chen." "Threes," said his translator, rendering his clicking speech into smooth English. "We are gratified by your invitation and the promise of mutual understanding between our peoples." "Ambassador Threes," Chen replied, bowing at precisely the angle specified in the protocol documents. "The honor is ours. Welcome aboard the Starfarer." The formal introductions proceeded with mechanical precision. Mark watched, waiting for his turn. When Ambassador Threes reached him, Mark executed the greeting flawlessly, including the subtle mandible-mimicking gesture with his jaw that humans had adapted for interspecies etiquette. "Greshka Tavorn," he said, the clicking sound perfect. All 4 of Threes's eyes widened slightly, a sign of approval in Zillion body language. "Your pronunciation is commendable, Communications Officer Vale." "Thank you, Ambassador. I have studied with great interest." Threes gave the Zillion equivalent of a nod and moved on. Mark exhaled softly, 1 hurdle successfully navigated. Then his gaze fell on the delegation member approaching him next. Dr. Naira was even more striking in person. Her exoskeletal ridges were accented with delicate metal inlays that caught the light, and her vestments were trimmed with what appeared to be scientific notations, rather than the traditional military insignias of the others. Her four eyes focused on him with unmistakable curiosity. "Greshka Tavorn," Mark repeated, executing the greeting again. "Greshka Tavorn." Dr. Nira replied, her voice softer and more melodic than Threese's. "I am Dr. Nira, cultural attaché and xenolinguistic specialist. Your command of our primary greeting is impressive, Officer Vale." Mark felt immediately at ease with her. Perhaps it was the genuine interest in her voice, or the way she had positioned herself slightly closer than the strictly formal distance maintained by the other Zillions. "You honor me, Dr. Nira. I find your language fascinating, though challenging." On impulse, he added, "I've been trying to appreciate some of your cultural expressions as well." All four of her eyes brightened a Zillion expression of pleasure. "Few humans venture beyond basic greetings. Which expressions have captured your interest?" This was his moment. Mark smiled, recalling the beautiful idiom. "There's one I found particularly moving, if I may." Dr. Nira tilted her head encouragingly. "Your mandibles move like moon moths dancing," Mark said carefully, trying to capture the lyrical quality he'd practiced. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Dr. Nira's skin, visible between her exoskeletal plates, flushed a deep scarlet. Her four eyes widened to their fullest extent. She made a choking sound and began to cough violently, a piece of the hors d'oeuvre she'd just accepted from a passing server lodging in whatever passed for a Zillion throat. The entire reception froze. Ambassador Thress whirled around his vestments, flaring dark red, a color Mark suddenly remembered indicated extreme agitation or aggression in Zillion color symbolism. "What have you done?" Threes demanded his translator, struggling to keep up with his rapid clicking. "What did you say to her?" Before Mark could respond, Dr. Nira recovered enough to gasp something in untranslated Zillion that caused the entire delegation to stiffen in shock. Two Zillion aides rushed to her side, supporting her, as she continued to struggle for composure. Captain Chen stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled crisis management. "Ambassador, please accept our deepest—" Silence. Threes cut her off with a slashing gesture. "Your officer has committed a grievous violation of diplomatic protocol." The phrase he uttered. The ambassador seemed too outraged to continue. One of the other Zillions leaned forward and whispered something to Threes, who nodded sharply. "Ambassador Thress," Mark said, stepping forward despite Arya's warning hand on his arm. "Whatever offense I've given was entirely unintentional. I was led to believe the expression was a respectful compliment." "Duh." "A compliment." Threese's mandibles clacked with indignation. "You have just propositioned Dr. Nira with the most intimate invitation possible in our culture. Such words are reserved for life-bonding ceremonies between those who have completed years of formal courtship." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. I had no idea. Please convey my sincerest apologies to Dr. Nira." "This is beyond a simple apology," Threes said. "I demand this officer be removed from all diplomatic functions and confined to quarters for the duration of our negotiations." Captain Chen stepped forward. "Ambassador, while we deeply regret this misunderstanding, Officer Vale is our chief communication specialist. His expertise is vital to these discussions." "Then these discussions are concluded before they have begun," Threes declared. "We will return to our vessel immediately." The room erupted in tense murmurs. Earth couldn't afford to lose this alliance. Mark watched in horror as his worst fears materialized once again, his misstep threatening a crucial diplomatic mission. But then, something unexpected happened. Dr. Nira, having regained her composure, stepped forward and addressed Ambassador Threes in rapid Zillion. Though Mark couldn't understand the words, the intensity of her argument was clear. She gestured several times toward the human delegation, and then specifically to Mark. Threes replied with obvious reluctance, his posture rigid with disapproval. After a tense exchange, he turned back to Captain Chen. "Dr. Naira suggests an alternative to our immediate departure," he said stiffly. "As the recipient of this inappropriate proposal, she has the right to invoke the ancient protocols of atonement and verification." Captain Chen glanced briefly at Mark before asking, "What would these protocols entail, Ambassador?" "3 trials," Threes explained. "First, a personal apology must be offered directly to the offended party in private, according to our customs. Second, as Officer Vale has implied his worthiness as a potential life bond partner, he must demonstrate his value through the Gronak Trial of Worth, a test typically reserved for Zillion warriors." "And the third?" Chen prompted when Threes paused. The ambassador's mandibles twitched with obvious discomfort. "The third is complicated. By speaking those words, your officer has technically initiated the rite of Vexus, an ancient courtship ritual. It cannot simply be withdrawn without severe dishonor to both parties." Mark felt the room spinning around him. He had accidentally initiated an alien courtship ritual with a woman-female he'd just met. "What exactly does this rite of Vexus entail?" Captain Chen asked carefully. "A period of formal interaction under the supervision of cultural elders," Threes said. "Normally, it would last for approximately 6 of your Earth months, but given the circumstances, Dr. Naira has suggested an abbreviated version sufficient to satisfy tradition without delaying your departure beyond 1 lunar cycle." Mark found his voice at last. "Ambassador Threes, I will of course submit to whatever protocols are necessary to repair this unfortunate misunderstanding. Please convey to Dr. Naira my profound regret for the discomfort I've caused her." Threes regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant acknowledgement. "Very well. The details will be arranged. The banquet may proceed, but you, Officer Vale, will begin your first trial immediately afterward." As the tension in the room gradually dissipated and the delegates moved toward their assigned seats, Mark caught Dr. Naira watching him. For a brief moment, her secondary eyes blinked in a pattern that seemed almost amused. But before he could interpret the gesture, she turned away, taking her place at the far end of the table. Arya appeared at his side, her expression a perfect blend of exasperation and concern. "Only you, Mark," she muttered. "Only you could accidentally propose marriage within 5 minutes of meeting an alien diplomat." "I was set up," Mark whispered back. "Ambassador Shen told me it was a compliment." Ambassador Shen, Arya frowned. "He's been on medical leave for 3 weeks. He never even met the Zillion advance team." Mark's stomach dropped. Who then had he overheard practicing that fateful phrase, and why? The banquet proceeded, with a palpable undercurrent of tension. Mark barely tasted the elaborately prepared dishes, his mind racing with questions and dread about the trials to come. Occasionally, he glanced toward Dr. Naira, finding her gaze on him more than once, her expression unreadable to his human perceptions. When the formal dinner concluded, Ambassador Thrace approached Mark. "Officer Vale, you will now accompany Dr. Naira to Observation Deck C for the first trial," he announced. "Captain Chen, 2 members of our delegation will attend as witnesses." Chen nodded. "Of course. Lieutenant Kelm will accompany Officer Vale as his cultural advisor." "That is acceptable," Threes conceded. As they filed out of the banquet hall, Mark fell into step beside Arya. "This is a nightmare," he whispered. "Look on the bright side," Arya replied under her breath. "At least you're not in the brig. Yet." "Your optimism is noted, Lieutenant. Just don't say anything else unless I clear it first, understood?" Mark nodded miserably as they entered the turbolift. The group rode in silence to Observation Deck C, a smaller, more intimate space, usually reserved for VIP guests. Its panoramic windows offered a stunning view of Zillia Prime below, and the star-studded blackness beyond. Dr. Naira positioned herself near the viewport, her silhouette outlined against the glow of her homeworld. The Zillion witnesses remained near the entrance, while Arya tactfully moved to a middle distance close enough to intervene, but far enough to give the appearance of privacy. Mark approached Dr. Naira with careful steps, stopping at the prescribed formal distance. "Dr. Naira, I have been instructed to offer my apology, according to Zillion custom. I must admit I am unfamiliar with the correct protocol, and would be grateful for your guidance. She turned to face him, and Mark was struck again by the intelligence in her 4 eyes. The protocol is simple, Officer Vale. You must speak your apology while placing your right hand over your primary cardiovascular organ, your heart, I believe, and your left hand extended palm upward toward me. Mark assumed the position as instructed. Dr. Naira, I offer my most sincere apology for the discomfort and embarrassment I caused you. My words were spoken in ignorance, not intent, but the harm is the same regardless. I ask for your forgiveness and the opportunity to make amends. Dr. Naira studied him for a long moment before responding. Your apology appears genuine, Officer Vale. She switched to Zillion, speaking a formal-sounding phrase that Mark couldn't understand, then extended her hand palm downward, above his upturned one, stopping just short of contact. The first trial is complete, she announced loud enough for the witnesses to hear. I accept the apology with the traditional reservation of judgment, pending completion of all trials. The Zillion witnesses clicked their approval and departed immediately, apparently satisfied with the procedure. Once they were gone, Dr. Naira's posture relaxed slightly. You may release the formal stance now, Officer Vale. Mark dropped his arms, flexing his shoulders. Thank you for your understanding, Dr. Naira, and for suggesting these trials rather than terminating the diplomatic mission entirely. It was the logical solution, she replied. Though I must admit I am curious about how you came to learn that particular phrase. I overheard it and was told it was a respectful compliment, Marks explained. I now realize I was either deliberately misled or tragically misunderstood. Indeed. Her head tilted in what Mark was beginning to recognize as the Zillion equivalent of contemplation. The phrase you spoke has very specific connotations in our culture. It refers to the mating dance of phosphorescent insects that illuminate our northern continents. These moon moths, as your translator rendered them, perform their courtship rituals through mandible vibrations that create complex harmonic patterns. So I essentially told you that your mouth movements were seductive, Mark winced. More precisely, you suggested my articulation patterns indicated I would be an ideal genetic and intellectual match for reproduction and life partnership. Dr. Naira clarified with remarkable scientific detachment. Among my people, it is considered the most direct declaration of intimate interest possible, typically reserved for formal bonding ceremonies after years of careful compatibility assessment. Mark felt heat rush to his face. I see why you choked on your appetizer. Was it his imagination, or did the corners of Dr. Naira's mandibles twitch slightly? The timing was indeed unfortunate, she acknowledged. Though in the interest of scientific accuracy, I should note that my reaction was not solely due to shock. No, Mark asked, puzzled. The physiological response you witnessed, what you would call blushing, is how my species manifests embarrassment, yes, but also... She paused, seeming to search for the right word. Interest. Your unexpected declaration triggered an involuntary response that my colleagues correctly interpreted as mutual consideration rather than pure offense. Mark blinked, processing this information. Wait, are you saying that you... I found the direct approach startling, but not entirely unwelcome, Dr. Naira said, matter-of-factly. It is refreshing compared to the excessively formal courtship procedures of my culture. Behind them, Arya cleared her throat pointedly. It seems your cultural advisor wishes to remind you of professional boundaries, Dr. Naira observed. She is wise to do so. Despite my personal curiosity about human directness, we must proceed according to protocol. The second trial, the Gronak test of worth, will begin tomorrow at 0800 hours. It would be advantageous for you to rest beforehand. What exactly does this test involve? Mark asked. A challenge designed to assess practical value as a potential partner, Dr. Naira explained. Traditionally, it would be tailored to the candidate's proclaimed strengths. Since you made no specific claims beyond implicit general worthiness, The Gronek elders will design a test based on your known professional capabilities. Communications and linguistic interpretation, Mark said. Precisely. Though I understand your service record also notes exceptional emergency piloting skills. Mark shifted uncomfortably. That's a reference to a few lucky maneuvers during crisis situations. I'm not an actual pilot. Interesting, Dr. Naira said. Luck is highly valued in Zillion culture, particularly unearned luck. We consider it evidence of cosmic favor. Before Mark could respond to this unexpected cultural insight, the ship's alert system blared to life. Attention all personnel, Captain Chen's voice announced. We are tracking 3 unidentified vessels approaching from the outer system. All diplomatic staff report to secure areas. Senior officers to the bridge immediately. Arya stepped forward. We should return to our posts, sir. Mark nodded, then turned back to Dr. Naira. Doctor, would you prefer to return to your vessel during this situation? No, she replied without hesitation. As cultural attaché, my place is here to observe and assess how your people respond to crisis. It will provide valuable insight into potential alliance compatibility. Very well, Mark said, impressed by her composure. Lieutenant Kelm will escort you to the diplomatic observation suite, adjacent to the bridge. It's our most secure facility with full monitoring capabilities. As they hurried through the corridors, Mark couldn't help but wonder who had set him up with that phrase, and did their sabotage have anything to do with the approaching vessels? Luck or not, he had a feeling things were about to get much more complicated than a mere cultural misunderstanding. When Mark reached the bridge, Captain Chen was already coordinating with Tactical. The main view screen showed 3 sleek, predatory-looking ships approaching in tight formation. Status, Mark asked, taking his station at communications. Unknown vessels not responding to hails, Chen replied tersely. Configuration suggests Dominion Scout class, but they're running without identification transponders. Mark's blood ran cold. If these were Dominion ships, it could mean the secretive Empire had already pushed into this sector much earlier than Earth intelligence had predicted. Continue broadcast on all frequencies standard diplomatic protocols, Chen ordered. Officer Vale, prepare specialized approach messages in Dominion trade dialect. Aye, Captain. Mark's fingers flew over his console, composing the careful, deliberately submissive greeting that Dominion ships expected from potential subjects. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Dr. Naira, watching from the observation suite, her 4 eyes taking in every detail of their crisis response. He found himself hoping they acquitted themselves well in her assessment. Captain, the tactical officer called. Their accelerating weapon systems powering up. Shields to maximum, Chen ordered. Prepare evasive maneuvers. The bridge tensed as the approaching ships suddenly split formation, moving to surround the Starfarer in a classic attack pattern. Sir, Ambassador Threes is hailing us from the Zillion vessel, Mark reported, as his console lit up with the incoming communication. On screen, Chen commanded. Ambassador Threes's face appeared. His 4 eyes narrowed with what appeared to be suspicion. Captain Chen, you failed to inform us that you were expecting additional Earth vessels. Chen frowned. These aren't ours, Ambassador. We believe they may be Dominion scouts. Impossible, Threes clicked. The Dominion is still contained behind the Arcturan barrier. These ships are clearly of Earth design, though modified. Perhaps mercenaries or colonists from your outer settlements. Mark studied the approaching vessels more carefully. Now that Threes mentioned it, there was something familiar about their configuration, but the energy signatures were all wrong for standard Earth drives. Captain, Mark said quietly, I believe these may be the Gronak vessels that Ambassador Threes mentioned earlier, the ones involved in the Trial of Worth. Chen's eyes widened in understanding. Ambassador, are these ships part of the Gronak trial you arranged for Officer Vale? Threes's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. Very perceptive, Captain. Yes, these are our Gronak allies administering the second trial as requested. They are creating what your tactical systems should register as an artificial asteroid field. As if on cue, the 3 ships began deploying dozens of small metallic spheres that quickly expanded into a complex shifting pattern around the starfarer. The trial requires your ship to navigate through this field, Threes explained. As Officer Vale proclaimed himself worthy of a Zillion pair bond, he must demonstrate his value by safely guiding your vessel through the obstacles. Ambassador, Chen protested. Officer Vale is not our pilot. He's a communication specialist. Yet his record notes exceptional piloting skills in emergency situations, Threes countered. Dr. Naira specifically highlighted this aspect of his service history. All eyes on the bridge turned to Mark, who swallowed hard. Captain, I should note that those incidents were primarily luck, rather than skill. Luck or skill, Mr. Vale, it appears you're about to be tested. Chen's expression was grim. Ambassador Threes, this trial puts my entire ship and crew at risk. Is there no alternative? The trial is traditional and binding, Threes replied implacably. However, I can assure you that while the spheroids will register as solid objects on your sensors, they are actually harmless energy constructs. Any collision would merely register as a failure in the trial, not damage your vessel. Chen appeared only marginally reassured. Very well. How long do we have to prepare? The field is being established now. The trial begins in 10 of your Earth minutes. As Threes' image disappeared from the screen, Chen turned to Mark. Communications Officer Vale, report to the auxiliary helm. It seems your luck is about to be tested. Mark rose shakily from his station. Captain, I must protest. My limited piloting experience doesn't qualify me for— Save it, Vale, Chen cut him off. Your diplomatic faux pas created this situation. Now you'll get us out of it. As Mark made his way to the auxiliary helm station, he caught sight of Dr. Naira watching from the observation suite. Her expression was unreadable, but he could have sworn one of her secondary eyes winked at him. The auxiliary helm controls felt foreign under Mark's hands. Though all officers received basic flight training, he hadn't actively piloted anything larger than a shuttle since his academy days. He quickly ran through the response checks, familiarizing himself with the Starfarer's maneuvering capabilities. The Gronak field is fully deployed, Tactical reported. Hundreds of metallic spheres in complex shifting orbits. Navigational computer identifies 17 possible routes, none with success probability above 42%. Comforting, Mark muttered. Captain Chen approached his station. Officer Vale, while I understand this trial is meant for you personally, my responsibility is to this ship and crew. If at any point I determine your piloting puts us at risk, I will take over. Understood? Completely, Captain. Mark agreed, relief evident in his voice. Actually, if you'd prefer to handle this from the start. The Zillions and Gronak will consider that failure, Chen said quietly. And we need this alliance. So do your best, and let's hope your legendary luck holds. The view screen now displayed a dizzying field of metallic spheres, ranging from shuttle-sized to massive globes, nearly a quarter of the Starfarer's size. They rotated and shifted position in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, creating momentary pathways that closed again seconds later. Trial commences in 30 seconds, the tactical officer announced. Mark took a deep breath and placed his hands firmly on the controls. He glanced once more at the observation suite, where Dr. Naira now stood with her hands pressed against the glass, all 4 eyes fixed intently on him. Beginning trial, the computer announced. Please navigate the indicated course. A suggested route appeared on the navigational display, a twisting, complex path through the densest portion of the field. Mark immediately recognized it as a test of precision rather than speed. The Gronak weren't just examining whether he could get through safely. They wanted to see if he could follow the most challenging route with exactitude. Here goes nothing, Mark murmured, easing the ship forward. The Starfarer responded smoothly, gliding toward the first cluster of spheres. Mark guided it through a tight gap, the ship's sensors indicating mere meters of clearance on either side. First obstacle cleared. Tactical reported unnecessarily. Everyone on the bridge could see the progress on the main view screen. Mark concentrated on the feel of the ship, letting instinct guide his adjustments. The second cluster required a rolling maneuver to thread between 3 converging spheres. He executed it perfectly, drawing a murmur of appreciation from the bridge crew. "He's actually doing it," someone whispered. "Don't jinx him," Arya hissed back. The course grew increasingly complex, with spheres now actively moving to intercept their path. Mark found himself anticipating their movements, making split-second adjustments that kept the Starfarer flowing smoothly through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. 70% complete, the computer announced. Difficulty increasing to final level. Suddenly, the remaining spheres began to spin rapidly, creating disruptive gravitational effects that pulled at the ship from multiple directions. Compensating. Mark said more to himself than anyone else. He increased power to the stabilizers and adjusted the ship's approach angle to use the gravitational forces to his advantage, slingshotting around a particularly massive sphere to line up perfectly with the next gap. 90% complete, final approach. The last section appeared impossible, a solid wall of overlapping spheres with no visible passage. Mark studied it for a precious few seconds, then made his decision. Altering course, he announced, veering away from the suggested route. "Vale, the trial requires you to follow the Chen began." "There's no way through on that path, Captain," Mark interrupted, confidence surging through him. "But there's a pattern to their movement. If we approach from below at reduced speed." He guided the ship into position, watching as the spheres continued their complex dance. Then, at precisely the right moment, he accelerated sharply. The Starfarer shot forward, passing through a momentary alignment of the spheres that created a narrow corridor, one that wouldn't have been visible from their original approach vector. "Trial complete," the computer announced as they emerged from the field. "Navigation assessment, perfect execution with creative problem-solving." The bridge erupted in spontaneous applause. Mark slumped back in his seat, adrenaline still coursing through his system. "Impressive, Officer Vale," Captain Chen said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Perhaps there's more than luck to your piloting skills after all." "Thank you, Captain, but Mark's response was cut short as the view screen shifted to show the three Gronak vessels approaching in formal salute formation. A new face appeared on the screen, a Gronak elder, their crystalline features arranged in what Mark hoped was an expression of approval. Human Marcus Vale, the Gronak's translator, rendered in slightly archaic English. "You have completed the physical portion of the Trial of Worth with unexpected excellence. Prepare now for the mental challenge." Before anyone could respond, a shimmer of energy engulfed Mark. The bridge disappeared around him, replaced by a vast temple-like space, with soaring crystalline arches and pulsing light patterns across the floor. "What?" Mark spun around, disoriented. Logic told him this must be some kind of simulation or projection, but his senses reported it as completely real. "Be welcome to the Temple of Gronak Discernment," a voice echoed from every direction. "Your mind now walks our paths while your body remains on your vessel. Fear not, this experience will cause no physical harm." Mark took a steadying breath. "I understand. What is required of me in this mental challenge?" The worthy partner for a Zillion bond must possess not only physical capabilities, but mental purity and emotional clarity, the voice explained. "You will face your greatest fear and your deepest bias. Through them, we will determine if your mind is worthy of the bond you have claimed." The temple space began to shift, the crystal arches melting and reforming into a familiar setting that made Mark's heart race with sudden dread, the bridge of the ESS Harbinger, his first posting after the Academy. The ship that had been lost with nearly all hands during a catastrophic warp drive failure. The ship where Mark had first earned his reputation for luck by being one of only 7 survivors, having been sent on an errand to the shielded communications bay moments before the explosion. Ghostly figures appeared around him, the crew he had served with the friends he had lost. Captain Terrence, who had taken a chance on a fresh Academy graduate. Lieutenant Wu, who had taught him the nuances of subspace frequencies over late-night coffee. Ensign Rodriguez, whose birthday they had celebrated the night before the disaster. "You lived while we died." The spectral, Captain Terrence said, his voice hollow. Not because of skill or worth, but simple chance. You build your career on our graves calling it luck, when it was merely the random cruelty of an indifferent universe. Mark felt the old guilt threatening to overwhelm him. I never claimed to deserve survival, he whispered. I've tried to honor your memories by serving well. Then why risk new lives with your supposed luck? Lieutenant Wu's ghost demanded. You know it's meaningless. You know it will run out. You're a fraud playing at competence, and eventually everyone around you will pay the price just as we did. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the truth in the accusation. His greatest fear laid bare that his luck was an illusion, that he was an imposter who would eventually lead others to disaster. But something about the ghost's words struck him as wrong. Wu had never been cruel in life. None of them had been. These weren't the colleagues he had known. They were manifestations of his own guilt and fear. You're right that my survival was random chance, Mark said, opening his eyes to face the apparitions. But you're wrong about the rest. The real Wu would know that I've worked every day to deserve the life I was given by chance. My luck isn't a skill or a talent, it's a responsibility, one I take seriously. The ghosts flickered, their accusing expressions wavering. I carry guilt for surviving, yes. Mark continued, finding strength in honest self-assessment. But I don't pretend my luck makes me special or worthy. I work, I study, I prepare, so that when luck runs out, skill and knowledge remain. The apparitions faded, and the scene shifted again. Now Mark stood in what appeared to be a Zillion dwelling, where Dr. Naira sat in conversation with several other Zillions. They spoke in their native language, clicks and trills that Mark couldn't understand without his translator. Your deepest bias, the Grunak voice announced. Observe. Mark watched as Dr. Naira gestured animatedly, her 4 eyes bright with passion about whatever topic they were discussing. The other Zillions responded with their own clicking communications mandibles, moving in complex patterns. Suddenly, Mark understood the test. Without his translator, without understanding their words, he was being asked to assess these alien beings purely on their physical appearance and mannerisms. Would he still see them, see Dr. Naira as an intelligent equal, worthy of respect? Or would the alienness of their forms trigger subconscious bias? He studied Dr. Naira's movements, the way she tilted her head in consideration of others' points, the precise gestures of her hands as she emphasized key concepts. Though he couldn't understand the words, he recognized the universal language of passionate discourse, of intellectual engagement, of respectful disagreement. I don't need to understand their words to recognize their intelligence and dignity, Mark said aloud. Dr. Naira is clearly a brilliant scientist and diplomat. Her physical form doesn't define her worth, her mind and her character do. As he spoke, he realized it was true. Despite their initial awkward meeting, he had quickly come to respect Dr. Naira, not as an alien curiosity, but as a person of substance and depth. And what of physical attraction? The Grunak voice challenged. The ritual you invoked suggests romantic intent. Can you truly claim to feel such connection to a form so different from your own? Mark considered the question seriously. Physical attraction is largely culturally determined, he said finally. What humans consider beautiful varies widely across our own cultures and history. If I were to spend time among the Zillions, learn their aesthetic values, understand the subtleties of their expressions, who's to say I couldn't develop genuine appreciation for their form of beauty? He looked directly at Dr. Naira's image. Already I find the animation of her expressions compelling, the grace of her movements admirable. That's the beginning of aesthetic appreciation across species boundaries. The temple scene dissolved around him, returning to the crystalline structure. 3 Grunak elders now stood before him, their faceted features catching the light in hypnotic patterns. Marcus Vale, the central elder, spoke. You have faced your fear with uncommon honesty and confronted your bias with philosophical depth. These are qualities valued by both our peoples. Does this mean I've passed the trial? Mark asked cautiously. The trial of worth is not passed or failed, another elder responded. It is merely experienced and assessed. You have shown yourself to be a being of complexity and potential. Whether this makes you worthy of the bond you have claimed is not for us to decide. The third elder stepped forward. You will now return to your vessel, carrying our judgment to those who await. The final trial remains the right of Vexus must be honored or formally dissolved by mutual consent. Before Mark could ask further questions, the temple shimmered and vanished. He found himself back on the bridge of the Starfarer, surrounded by concerned faces. Officer Vale, Captain Chen, was saying, her hand on his shoulder. Can you hear me? Mark blinked, readjusting to reality. Yes, Captain. I'm fine. The Gronek mental trial is complete. You've been in a trance-like state for nearly 40 minutes, Arya informed him. Your vital signs were stable, but you were completely unresponsive. It felt like hours, Mark murmured. He looked up to find Dr. Naira had entered the bridge, proper, her expression concerned. The Gronak elders have transmitted their assessment, she said, approaching cautiously. You performed unexpectedly well in both trials. What happens now? Mark asked. Now we must address the right of Vexus, Dr. Naira replied. Would you join me in the ship's biogarden? It's a more appropriate setting for the discussion. Captain Chen nodded her permission, and Mark rose somewhat unsteadily to his feet. Lead the way, Doctor. As they walked through the corridors toward the ship's central biogarden, Mark became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere aboard the Starfarer. Crew members they passed regarded him with newfound respect, and there was a palpable sense of optimism that had been missing before. Your performance in the trials has made quite an impression, Dr. Naira observed, noticing his puzzled expression. Word travels quickly aboard starships, it seems. I was just doing what was necessary, Mark said. I still don't understand why Ambassador Threes agreed to the trials at all, rather than simply demanding reparations for my mistake. They reached the biogarden, a vast dome filled with carefully cultivated plants from dozens of worlds. The air was rich with oxygen and subtle fragrances, and gentle artificial sunlight filtered through the transparent ceiling. Dr. Naira led him to a secluded bench nestled between flowering earth cherry trees and tall, slender Zillion crystalline growths. Ambassador Threes agreed because I convinced him it was diplomatically advantageous, she explained, once they were seated. The truth is, Marcus Vale, your blunder created an unexpected opportunity. An opportunity, Mark echoed, confused. For observation and assessment, she clarified. You see, our delegation was already split on whether to form an alliance with Earth. The conservative faction led by Threes harbors deep concerns about human reliability and cultural compatibility. My faction advocates for closer ties. And my mistake gave you a chance to gather evidence for your position, Mark realized. Dr. Naira's mandibles flexed in what he was beginning to recognize as a smile. Precisely. The trials allowed us to observe human crisis response problem-solving and philosophical thinking under controlled conditions. Your ship and captain were tested as much as you were. So the right of Vexus, it's just another test. Not exactly. She shifted her four eyes, focusing on different aspects of his face, in a disconcerting but not unpleasant way. The rite of Vexus is indeed a genuine courtship ritual, traditionally lasting 6 months, and culminating in either formal bonding or honorable dissolution. Mark swallowed nervously. And which outcome are you hoping for, Dr. Naira? I believe diplomacy and science should be guided by data rather than preconceptions, she replied carefully. The abbreviated version I've proposed would allow us to explore cultural compatibility in a structured context without lifetime commitment. 3 weeks of formal interaction followed by a ceremonial decision. That sounds reasonable, Mark said, finding himself genuinely intrigued by the prospect of learning more about her and her culture. But why go to these lengths? Surely there are simpler ways to assess alliance compatibility. Dr. Naira was silent for a moment, her secondary eyes blinking in what appeared to be a pattern of consideration. There is another factor I have not mentioned, she finally said. Our long-range sensors have detected a Dominion fleet moving toward this sector. They will arrive within 3 weeks. Mark sat up straight. That's vital military intelligence. Why hasn't Ambassador 3 shared this with Captain Chen? Because the Gronak have proposed a 3-species defense pact, and 3's fears humans will prove unreliable when actually facing the Dominion, Dr. Naira explained. The trials were partially designed to test Earth's commitment and capabilities under pressure. And what would this rite of Vexus have to do with a military alliance? In Zillion culture, bonds between individuals often precede and symbolize bonds between groups, Dr. Naira said. A successful courtship between a human officer and a Zillion diplomat could become the living embodiment of our alliance, physical proof of compatibility between our species. Mark let out a low whistle. So I'm not just on trial for accidentally propositioning you. I'm potentially the linchpin of an interspecies military alliance against an existential threat. An uncomfortably accurate summary, Dr. Naira admitted. Though I should clarify that while the diplomatic implications are significant, the rite of Vexus itself is not merely symbolic. It is a genuine exploration of personal compatibility. She hesitated, then added, and I should acknowledge that my physiological response to your accidental proposition was not entirely diplomatic in nature. Mark felt his face warm. You mentioned something about that earlier, about blushing indicating interest. Indeed. Her mandibles twitched, with what might have been embarrassment. I have spent considerable time studying human culture. Your species' directness, while sometimes problematic in formal settings, has always intrigued me on a personal level. Zillion courtship is typically so prolonged and formal that spontaneity is all but eliminated from the process. So my blundering directness was accidentally appealing. Mark couldn't help smiling. I found it refreshingly authentic, Dr. Naira acknowledged, though the timing and public setting were far from ideal. Before Mark could respond, the ship's alert system activated again. Attention all personnel, Captain Chen's voice announced. 3 Dominion vessels have been detected entering the outer system. All hands to battle stations. Diplomatic staff to secure areas immediately. Mark stood instinct, pulling him toward his duty station, but Dr. Naira caught his arm. This is happening much faster than our projections indicated, she said, her voice tight with concern. The defense pact isn't formalized yet. Without it, none of our species stands a chance against the Dominion alone. Mark made a split-second decision. Then we'll have to accelerate things. Dr. Naira, will you come with me to the bridge? If we're going to form an emergency alliance, we'll need both diplomatic teams working together. Agreed, she said without hesitation. As they hurried through the corridors, Mark activated his communicator. Captain Chen, this is Officer Vale. I have critical intelligence about the approaching vessels and a potential alliance opportunity. Requesting permission to bring Dr. Naira directly to the bridge. Granted, Chen replied tersely. Make it quick, Vale. Those ships will be in weapons range in less than an hour. When they reached the bridge, they found it in controlled chaos. Tactical officers were preparing defense systems, while communications personnel attempted to establish contact with the approaching Dominion vessels. Captain, Mark said, Dr. Naira has informed me that the Zillions and Gronak have been monitoring Dominion fleet movements. These 3 ships are likely an advanced scout party for a much larger force. Chen's expression darkened. How much larger? Based on our intelligence, at least 20 capital ships, Dr. Naira answered. But there is a possibility for defense. The Gronak have proposed a 3-species alliance, their psychic defense systems combined with Zillion propulsion technology, and Earth's tactical innovations could create an effective deterrent. Ambassador Threes has mentioned no such proposal, Chen said skeptically. He was waiting for the outcome of the trials, Dr. Naira explained. But we no longer have that luxury. With your permission, Captain, I would like to contact both our delegation and the Gronak representatives to propose an emergency conference. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. Make it happen, Officer Vale. Set up the conference in Briefing Room 1. You have 15 minutes before I need to focus entirely on those approaching ships. Mark hurried to the communication station, quickly establishing links to both the Zillion vessel and the Gronak ships. To his surprise, both Ambassador Threes and the Gronak elders agreed immediately to the emergency conference. Within minutes, the key representatives from all three species were gathered in Briefing Room 1. The tension was palpable as Captain Chen laid out the tactical situation in blunt terms. 3 Dominion vessels approaching, likely scouts for a larger fleet. Standard hailing attempts have been ignored. Our options are limited fight flee or form a united front that might give them pause. Ambassador Threes stepped forward. The trials have shown promising results regarding human capabilities and character, he acknowledged. However, forming a binding military alliance typically requires months of negotiation and protocol. Which we don't have, Mark pointed out. But there is a precedent for accelerated alliance formation in Zillion culture, isn't there, Dr. Naira? All eyes turned to her. Yes, she confirmed. The rite of Vexus, when completed, can serve as a symbolic binding of our peoples. It would be unprecedented to apply it in this context, but these are unprecedented circumstances. What exactly would be required? Chen asked. A formal declaration of mutual intent before witnesses from all 3 species, Dr. Naira explained. Traditionally, this would be followed by a 6-month period of proving compatibility, but in emergency situations, the declaration itself can constitute a preliminary bond. One of the Gronak elders spoke up, crystalline features catching the light. Our seers have examined the potential paths forward. The one with highest survival probability involves this Vexus bond between the human officer and Zillion diplomat, serving as catalyst for our unified defense. Ambassador Threes' mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation or intense consideration. Finally, he said, "If Officer Vale and Dr. Naira are willing to formalize the rite of Vexus immediately, I am authorized to approve an emergency alliance protocol." Mark turned to Dr. Naira, suddenly aware of the enormity of what was being proposed. "This goes well beyond diplomatic duty," he said quietly. "Are you certain about this?" All 4 of her eyes focused on him with intense clarity. "I have studied your species extensively, Marcus Vale. What began as scientific curiosity has evolved into genuine respect and interest. I am prepared to explore whether that interest might become something more, as the ritual requires." Mark felt a surprising sense of rightness as he nodded. "Then I accept the responsibility and the opportunity." The formal declaration was brief, but profound. Standing before representatives of 3 species, Mark and Dr. Naira spoke the traditional words of the rite of Vexus, she in her native clicking language, he in the careful translation she provided. They pledged to explore compatibility with open minds and honest hearts, to respect cultural differences while seeking common ground, and to allow their personal journey to illuminate the path for their peoples. As the final words were spoken, Ambassador Threes, Captain Chen, and the Gronak elder placed their hands or equivalent appendages on a ceremonial cloth, signifying their witness and approval of the bond. "It is done," Threes declared. "The alliance is formed, preliminary but binding. Now we must prepare to face the Dominion threat as one." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The Zillion and Gronak vessels moved into defensive formation alongside the Starfarer. Their complementary technologies quickly integrated through makeshift interfaces. Dr. Naira worked tirelessly with both engineering teams, her scientific expertise proving invaluable in solving compatibility issues. Mark found himself shuttling between communication centers, ensuring that tactical information flowed smoothly between the 3 command structures. Despite the crisis circumstances, or perhaps because of them, he was struck by how naturally they all began to work together, each species contributing unique strengths to the unified defense. When the Dominion scouts arrived, they found not a single Earth vessel, as their intelligence had suggested, but a coordinated 3-species defense force with weapons charged and shields reinforced by Gronak's psychic enhancements. The Dominion commander's face appeared on the viewscreen humanoid, but with distinctive ridged features and cold, calculating eyes. This sector has been claimed by the Dominion. Surrender your vessels and prepare for assimilation. Captain Chen, now serving as the Alliance's primary spokesperson, stood firm. This sector is protected by the combined forces of Earth, Zilia, and Gronak. We have no intention of surrendering. However, we are open to establishing peaceful boundaries that respect the sovereignty of all species. The Dominion commander's eyes narrowed. The Dominion does not negotiate with inferior species. Then, perhaps you should reconsider your assessment of our status, Chen replied coolly. Our combined capabilities may surprise you. As if to emphasize her point, the Gronak vessels activated their psychic defense system, a shimmering field of energy that disrupted the Dominion sensor scans. Simultaneously, the Zillion ship demonstrated its advanced propulsion by executing a maneuver that should have been impossible, circling behind the Dominion scouts in seconds. The demonstration had its intended effect. After a tense silence, the Dominion commander spoke again. We will withdraw to assess this unexpected development, but the Dominion will return. And we will be waiting, Chen promised. As the Dominion vessels retreated, a cautious celebration spread through the Alliance ships. They had won a crucial first confrontation without firing a shot, a victory of presence and unity, rather than destructive force. In the quiet aftermath, Mark found Dr. Naira in the ship's biogarden, again, gazing up at the stars through the transparent dome. Quite a day, he said, joining her on the bench. From diplomatic disaster to interspecies alliance in less than 24 hours. An efficient use of time, she agreed, her mandibles twitching in the expression he now recognized as humor. Though the Dominion will indeed return with greater numbers. And we'll be ready, Mark said with confidence. The alliance is already proving stronger than any of us anticipated. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Dr. Naira spoke again. I've been authorized to remain aboard the Starfarer as permanent liaison for the Alliance. It will allow us to properly honor the right of Vexus over the coming weeks. I'm glad, Mark admitted. I find I'm genuinely looking forward to learning more about you and your culture beyond diplomatic necessity. As am I, she said. Though I must confess there is one aspect of the right of Vexus I have not fully explained. Oh, Mark raised an eyebrow. What's that? If the compatibility exploration proves successful, and we choose to formalize the bond permanently, she hesitated. Zillion and human biology is surprisingly compatible. Offspring are possible, though exceedingly rare. Mark blinked, processing this revelation. That's not something I had considered. Nor had I until recently, Dr. Naira admitted. But our scientists have confirmed the possibility. Such a child would be a living symbol of our alliance, concrete proof that our species can not only cooperate, but create something new and unique together. The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. That's a discussion for another day, Mark said gently. For now, let's focus on getting to know each other properly. Dr. Naira's secondary eyes blinked in a pattern of agreement. A wise approach. Though I must admit your original compliment about my mandibles, moving like moon moths dancing, was not entirely inaccurate from a physiological perspective. Mark laughed. I still can't believe someone set me up with that phrase. I never did find out who it was. Actually, Dr. Naira said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. I have a theory about that. One of our junior cultural officers has a rather mischievous sense of humor. He may have anticipated that such a misunderstanding could force our delegations to engage more authentically. So I was manipulated into creating a diplomatic incident, Mark asked, unsure whether to be amused or outraged. Perhaps guided toward an opportunity neither of us would have discovered otherwise, Dr. Naira suggested. Sometimes the most direct path between 2 points isn't a straight line, but a series of fortunate accidents. Lucky accidents, Mark mused. Something I'm apparently known for. Indeed. She reached out tentatively, her Zillion hand hovering near his human one. Perhaps your luck is more than random chance. Perhaps it's the universe's way of creating connections that logic alone would never attempt. Mark closed the distance gently, taking her hand in his. The gesture felt strange, but not unpleasant alien, yet increasingly familiar. "To fortunate accidents, then," he said. "And to what we choose to build from them," Dr. Naira replied. Above them, stars shone through the Biogarden dome, the same stars that had witnessed countless species evolve in isolation, now watching as 3 of those species took their first steps toward a shared future. And at the center of that cosmic drama, an accidental proposal was blooming into something genuine and unprecedented. A bridge between worlds that began with a simple, misunderstood compliment about dancing mandibles. 6 months later, the Starfarer returned to Earth orbit, accompanied by a full diplomatic fleet from both Zilia and Gronak. The 3-species alliance had grown from emergency measure to formal treaty, their combined forces successfully repelling the Dominion's attempted incursion into the sector. In the Grand Council chamber of Earth's diplomatic corps, representatives from all 3 worlds gathered for the historic signing ceremony. At the center of attention stood Marcus Vale and Dr. Naira, no longer merely symbols of the alliance, but its living embodiment. Dr. Naira's exoskeletal form was visibly changed, her abdominal section enlarged, in a way that announced her condition to all who understood Zillian physiology. The hybrid child growing within her, conceived against astronomical odds, had become the ultimate proof of compatibility between their species. Today, we formalize what began as a misunderstanding and grew into the foundation of peace for our peoples. Ambassador Threes announced his once skeptical attitude, now transformed into proud advocacy. The bond between Officer Vale and Dr. Naira has shown us that differences need not divide us, that diversity can be our greatest strength when we approach it with open minds and hearts. As Mark and Naira stepped forward to add their signatures to the treaty, a small movement fluttered beneath Naira's ceremonial vestments. She placed a hand over the spot, her 4 eyes widening in delight. "The child moves vigorously," she whispered to Mark, as though eager to join the celebration. Mark covered her hand with his own, marveling at the miracle they had created together. "He or she will be born into a very different universe than the one we knew, one where species stand together rather than apart." As if in response to his words, the baby kicked again, the movement visible, even through Naira's clothing. The assembled dignitaries noticed, and a ripple of appreciative murmurs spread through the chamber. "May I?" Captain Chen asked, approaching with outstretched hand. Naira nodded, guiding the captain's hand to the spot. When the baby kicked again, Chen's face lit with wonder. "Strong," she observed, "like both parents." The moment captured the essence of what they had achieved, not merely a political alliance, but a fundamental shift in understanding what was possible when different worlds came together. Later, as they stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Alliance headquarters station, Mark and Naira watched shuttles coming and going between the gathered ships, human Zillian and Gronak crew members moving freely between vessels that once would have regarded each other with suspicion. "I never imagined my diplomatic career taking this particular turn," Mark admitted. "From communications officer to interspecies parent and alliance symbol. The universe rarely follows our careful plans." Naira replied, her English now nearly flawless after months of constant practice. "Sometimes it offers us something far better than we would have designed." "Do you ever regret it?" Mark asked quietly. "Taking a chance on a bumbling human who couldn't even get a simple greeting right?" All 4 of Naira's eyes focused on him with the intensity of absolute certainty. "Not for a moment. Your mistake broke through barriers that centuries of careful diplomacy might never have breached." Besides, her mandibles twitched in the expression he now recognized as her smile. "I find your directness continues to be refreshingly authentic." As if punctuating her statement, their child chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick. They both laughed, the sound of human and Zillian amusement blending into something new and harmonious. In the council chamber below, delegates were still celebrating the treaty signing when a communication arrived from the border outpost, a Dominion diplomatic vessel requesting parley. For the first time in recorded history, the expansionist empire was proposing negotiation rather than conquest. When informed of this development, Mark and Nira exchanged a look of cautious hope. Their child would perhaps be born into an even more peaceful universe than they had dared to imagine, all because of one misplaced compliment about dancing mandibles. 3 weeks later, Dr. Nira gave birth to a healthy hybrid daughter, the first of her kind in the known universe. As the infant's first coo echoed through the medical bay, both parents felt the weight and wonder of what they had created, not just a child, but a future where differences were bridges rather than barriers, where accidents could become opportunities, and where love could transcend the vast distances between stars and species. The child's 4 eyes, too human-like and too zillion, gazed up at them with ancient wisdom and newborn innocence. Her tiny mandibles clicked softly as she reached up with perfectly formed hands, a sound that to her parents' ears was more beautiful than any poetry in any language across the stars. And as news of the birth spread across 3 worlds, beings of every form and philosophy paused to consider what it meant, this living proof that the universe was wider and more wonderful than any single species could comprehend alone. The child born of an accidental proposal had become hope incarnate, the first citizen of a truly united alliance of worlds.